I fell in love with my therapist, and he left his wife for me. If that makes me the villain in this story, so be it. But before you judge me, let me tell you how it happened. When I first met Dr. Nathan Carter, I was at my lowest point. My anxiety had taken over my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even leave my apartment without feeling like the walls were closing in. Therapy was my last resort, and I didn't have high hopes. But then I met him. He had this way of making you feel seen, like you weren't just another broken person sitting on his couch. For the first time in years, I felt like someone actually cared about what I had to say. And maybe that's where the trouble started. I told him things I'd never told anyone about my childhood, my failed relationships, the crushing loneliness I felt every day. And he listened, really listened, like every word mattered. Over time, I started to look forward to our sessions. They became the highlight of my week. I knew it was wrong to think of him as anything more than my therapist. But the way he looked at me sometimes, the way he said my name, it felt like there was something more there. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just transference or some other therapy term I didn't understand. But deep down, I knew. It started with small things: extra sessions, late-night phone calls when I was struggling, little gestures that felt too personal to be professional. He'd tell me I was brave, that he admired my strength, and I clung to those words like a lifeline. The more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore the connection between us. It wasn't just me. I could see it in the way he smiled at me, the way he lingered a little too long when he handed me a tissue. But neither of us said anything. Not yet. One day, I ran into him at a coffee shop. It was the first time I'd seen him outside of the office, and it felt different. He wasn't just my therapist anymore. He was a real person with a life and a family. And that should have been enough to stop me. But it wasn't. The night everything changed, I was in tears, spilling my heart out about how unlovable I felt. He moved from his chair to sit next to me on the couch, his hand resting on mine. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like the world shifted. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it, "you deserve to be loved. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." And in that moment, I forgot he was my therapist. I forgot about his wife, his family, all of it. All I could think about was how much I wanted him to mean those words. I knew we'd crossed a line, even if neither of us had said it out loud. But I couldn't bring myself to regret it. For the first time in years, I felt alive. This opening chapter introduces the controversial premise and sets the stage for the emotional and ethical conflicts that will unfold. Would you like me to continue expanding this into additional chapters? It was supposed to be just another session. I'd come in feeling restless, my thoughts spiraling into the usual chaos. But tonight, something felt different. He was quieter than usual, his questions more personal. And when I told him how much his support meant to me, his eyes softened in a way that made my heart race. "Emily," he said as I reached for the door handle. His voice stopped me in my tracks. "You're not alone in this." I turned back to face him, and before I could stop myself, I asked, "Am I just a patient to you?" The room went silent, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. He stood up, closing the space between us. "You're more than that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And then, before I could think, before either of us could talk ourselves out of it, his lips were on mine. It was everything I'd ever wanted and everything I knew I shouldn't have. I pulled away, my heart pounding. "This is wrong," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I didn't mean them. He looked at me, his expression torn between guilt and longing. "I know," he said, "but I can't stop." Keeping our relationship a secret was harder than I thought. Every time I saw my friends, I felt like they could see right through me. And every time I thought about his wife, a wave of guilt crashed over me. But when we were together, none of that mattered. It was like the rest of the world disappeared, and it was just us. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said one night, his voice low and urgent. This isn't fair to either of us. I knew what he meant, that we couldn't keep living in this limbo. But I also knew I wasn't ready to let him go. Seeing him with her was like a punch to the gut. She was beautiful, poised, everything I wasn't. And yet, when our eyes met across the room, I saw the same longing in his that I felt in mine. It was a dangerous game we were playing, and I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep it up. I've tried to fight this, he said, pacing the room. I've told myself 100 times that it's wrong, that I'm risking everything. But I can't pretend anymore. I'm in love with you, Emily. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. What about your wife? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his expression full of pain. I care about her, but it's not the same. It hasn't been for a long time. His confession was everything I'd wanted to hear, but it also terrified me. Because now, there was no turning back. We didn't plan for it to happen. One moment we were talking, and the next, we were in his arms, lost in each other. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. But as I lay there afterward, reality came crashing down. This wasn't just about us anymore, it was about the life we were destroying. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. She found the messages we'd sent late at night, the ones filled with words we couldn't say out loud. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He told her everything. I've made my choice, he said, his voice steady. I want to be with you. I should have felt relief, even happiness. But all I felt was fear. Because now, there was no going back. We crossed a line, and the fallout was just beginning. Word spread quickly, and before I knew it, I was the topic of every whispered conversation. My friends were furious, calling me selfish, a homewrecker. And maybe they were right. But I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Because for the first time in my life, I was fighting for something I wanted. When the board found out about our relationship, they called it a breach of ethics. He tried to explain, to tell them it wasn't as simple as it seemed. But in the end, it didn't matter. He lost his license, his career, everything he'd worked for, and it was all because of me. We thought we could start over, build a life together away from the judgment and the whispers. But the weight of what we'd done followed us everywhere. Every argument, every awkward encounter with someone from his past was a reminder of the price we'd paid. This continuation sets up the emotional and ethical stakes of the story, driving the narrative toward its climax and resolution. Would you like me to keep going with the next chapters? We thought moving away would fix everything. A fresh start, we called it. But no matter how far we went, we couldn't escape the consequences of our choices. The whispers followed us, turning into stares, judgment etched into every glance from neighbors and strangers alike. I watched him unpack books from his office, his hands moving slower than usual. He'd given up everything for me, his career, his reputation, his family. And as much as I loved him, I couldn't help but wonder if I was worth it. Do you regret it? I asked one night, my voice barely audible. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Sometimes, he admitted, but not because of you. I regret how we got here, the pain we caused. But being with you, that's the one thing I don't regret. Without his license, Nathan was lost. He tried to find work in other fields, but every rejection chipped away at him. He started spending more time at home, his frustration bubbling to the surface. And I couldn't help but feel like I was watching him unravel. You don't understand what it's like, he said, his voice sharp. I gave up everything for us, and now I'm stuck. You think this is easy for me? I shot back, my own anger rising. I lost friends, family. I'm just as isolated as you are. It was the first time we'd fought, and it left a crack in the foundation we'd built. For the first time, I started to wonder if love was enough to hold us together.